Welcome to Still Growing in Grace, a program dedicated to inspiring joy, giving hope, and delighting in grace. I'm Mike Zenker, and I'll be sharing with you a message of hope that will expand your understanding of God's love and amazing grace. God already deeply loves you, totally accepts you, and really, really likes you. Growing in Grace Ministries Canada and Hope Fellowship, your community church, invite you to enjoy today's program as we dig deeper into what it means to be still growing in grace. Oh man, I was chatting and saying hello to everybody, and I didn't realize I didn't fade this to make it go live. Oh my goodness! Good morning, everyone. It is so good to have you with us today. We took a couple weeks off. I had a staycation because I wasn't allowed to go anywhere, and it's so good to be back with you. Today we're going to continue on in our series, "What is Hell?" And the reason we call it "What is Hell" instead of "Is Hell Real?" Because there's enough people who talk about that. And if you're seriously interested in hearing about this topic, then these 4 conversations are really good. I think we have 2 more that are potentially booked, and I think you'll enjoy that. So let's dig into the conversation with Richard and Bill. If you did not watch part 1 and 2 or 3, you need to go back because we're unpacking the system of thinking about this topic we call hell. Most people don't realize they do have a belief in it. Like you may say, well, I don't really have a belief in hell. Yeah, you do. Either it doesn't exist or it's whatever you were told in Sunday school or whatever your particular church tells you it is. If you're a minister or a preacher or a person of the clergy, you have come to study a little bit about it, but usually it is what you have been told it is if you haven't done your own due diligence and dug deeper. We need to explore this because this is one of those secret underlying themes that guard and guide our conduct in life, and it kind of directs the course of our conversations with other people. It also has the us versus them mindset built into it. Yeah, it's exclusive, not inclusive. This is a mind-blowing topic. So let's. If you haven't gone through the parts 1, 2, and 3, please do. But you can still listen in today. This is still good. You'll pick up a lot. But I think next time we may. Oh, I'll talk about it later. So let's just dig in because this is gonna be so good. Let's enjoy this conversation. Here we go. All right. Welcome back to Still Growing in Grace. I love the conversation from last week, 2 minutes ago. But Richard, start again with what you just ended with, and then Bill will jump in.
I was just talking about, you were talking about how the vine passages is misinterpreted and how it really talks about lifting the entire thing up, not throwing it in the fire. But even the other one that's talking about the branches, about that, the unprofitable branches that are cut off and thrown in the fire, that Colossus is the idea of which is punishment. The word for punishment in the New Testament was originally a word about pruning so that fuller growth may occur. And that passage in John, Jesus is actually saying the branches are removed so that a growth that is from God can come for what's left. And that's we are the plant. We're not the branches. We are the plant. Now Jesus is obviously the life that's in us, but he's talking about letting us attain growth, which is from God. He's not talking about throwing us in the fire, just the unprofitable parts of us, the barren ideas and the barren notions and the barren impulses and the barren thought systems that we operate up, things that make us sick and low functioning, all those things, so that we can have fuller growth.
The stuff that isn't even us to begin with.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, and that's, there's really, and I think this is a good segue, in a small regard to the idea of punishment, hell, Jesus, vengeance, all these kind of, judgment, justice. The truth is, in Jesus's recorded life that we have, there, to my knowledge, there are really only two what could be considered violent acts from Jesus. First is the purging of the temple. And there's a lot of stuff going on there. And I think that's a good one because I think there's so much to unpack right there that it kind of is a beautiful allegory of everything we're describing. And in tandem with that is the cursing of the fig tree. It's, to my knowledge, the only thing that Jesus encounters that withers and dies. Everything else that Jesus comes into contact with that has sickness or death comes back.
And people are saying that story it doesn't make sense because he's cursing his own creation. How does that work?
Yeah.
Right.
So I think there's two things, Richard, you reposted something that I know you've written longer ago, but that just recently I saw it and I really appreciated its kind of renewing spirit over me. And the idea of Jesus going in and, lacing left over right, making this whip and going out and, throwing down with the money changers. And there's probably a little bit of that same negative imagination we talked in the last section about going on there. We fail to use the positive side of our imagination to understand what's going on there. Number one, Jesus is specifically fulfilling prophecy. And I won't get into the details of that, but if you ever study the Passover week, there's a process where you meticulously, as an Orthodox Jew, go through your house and you take out every tiny scrap of leaven. You use a little whisk brush, literally, and you take all the corners of your house and you sweep so that, because the law prevented you from having contact with leaven in the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And so Jesus is literally performing the fulfillment of the prophecy that is found in the law of the prophets in this act of cleansing the temple.
That's cool.
With a small corded whip, and he's literally brushing out.
Not people.
He brushes out the impure sacrifices, and he does kind of kick out the den of robbers, right? So there's that thing going on. So that point to that is there is a significance to that event prophetically that was very intentional. Moreover, I think, Richard, what happens right thereafter?
Well, yeah. Right. Yeah. Well,
here you go, soft one.
Thanks, brother.
Do tell.
No, I do have some strong feelings about this incident because they're right next to each other.
Yep.
First, he does the fig tree, and actually, I think the fig tree doesn't die right away; it dies later. Yep. But
the next day,
in between the time, he's gone to do this temple incident. So he's just prophesying what he's giving a human allegory of what he's about to do. And he goes now. He curses the fig tree, and it's like what I wrote. I was saying, if you would tell me that Jesus killing a weed, because remember, this fig tree was not functioning. It was already dead. It was functionally dead. It wasn't bearing fruit. All right. So for him to curse it is to allow what to happen in its place, fuller growth. So then he goes to the temple and does that. Now get this. The cattle that he pushes out of the way, they were about to be killed. Okay. Yep. They were about to be slaughtered. the cattle get to live another day now. So I don't really think you could get very far saying he was violent. He was saving their doggone lives. And as we know elsewhere, he doesn't desire sacrifice.
So if there were mules there, he was saving their asses.
Yeah, it's exactly right. And and Bill's comment leading up to it was what took its place was that once they got ushered out of the way, then the kids started coming into the temple and started praising God with a perfect praise. All right, they miss that part of it. There was a huge praise service led by children in the wake of these in the wake of these barren fig tree Pharisees that were in there. All right, Jesus removed them. They were unfruitful. They were barren. They are the fig tree. The whole thing was pointing to that so that he can replace it with something that is fruitful. So that's what that whole thing was about. It wasn't about anybody getting hurt or him being violent. You know, he was clearing it out for the kids to come in. Now, come on.
But, that's the picture of justice. And so he goes back to the fig tree the next day, and it's withered and died. And you guys may know this. I'm sure you have, Mike, read Eve.
No, I started to, but never finished it.
Oh my goodness, it's such a good book. I don't know, Richard, if you've ever read Eve by William Paul Young. If you haven't, it takes a minute to get going. It really does. You got to get this character development and stuff. But if you haven't ever read it, but the epilogue on that book has a really interesting kind of tidbit in it, and it's true. When you look back at the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, right? They eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Their eyes are open to their nakedness, right? We might call them, they actually are blinded to the love of God, right? So two things are happening there simultaneously, and they're shamed and they hide and they sew, clothing out of the leaves from a fig tree.
Fig tree, yeah.
Fig tree. So there's a Jewish perspective in this, and that's long. See, Westerners, what's the fruit? Come on, everybody says what the fruit is in Western culture. What is it? An apple.
The apple.
Apple.
Yeah.
What?
No, see, Eastern culture would have seen it as a fig tree. That they covered themselves with the leaf of the trees of the knowledge of good and evil. Again, this is allegory. Let's keep this open-hearted and open-minded. But the idea that a fig fruit, I love figs. My grandfather used to have a huge fig tree at our farm that I used to go to when I was a kid. I'd go out in the woods and shoot a .22 rifle at 10 years old, completely,
that explains a lot.
Unsupervised. Unsupervised, right? Different age and time. It was great. But there were these fig trees. You get a ripe fig right off the vine that was almost right on that edge of probably only a day or two away from turning. It's at its most sweet and its most delectable, but you can't eat a fig. You can't eat a fig without consuming its seeds. You can't. The entire fig it's so packed with seeds that you can't eat a fig. And so
is that what the grit is?
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea of a fig tree is it's impossible to eat it without being affected by its root, right? Its seed. And so the idea that the fig tree represented the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which brought death, is a huge component of this story too. So when Jesus is cursing the fruitless fig tree, there's an image going all the way back to the garden, the coverings that were insufficient for their nakedness from the fruit that they consumed. Jesus is cursing the thing that brought that disconnected, alienated mind of humanity, and it withers and dies. It's the only thing that Jesus speaks a word to that dies in the entire narrative.
I am so stealing this.
The one thing that gave us the impression that we could be separated from the love of God.
That's incredible. That preaches, man.
And really, I mean, some people will use that as I had a guy once that passage, cursing the fig tree, paints Jesus as Steven Seagal, who goes down and wipes out the temple, of all these things. And I was thinking, so let me get this straight. The fact that he pulls up a weed, which is essentially what that fig tree was. It was a weed. Nobody would have commented had Jesus pulled up a weed at some point here in his life. You don't think his mom had him maybe go pull out some weeds one time? Weeds are not, and I understand you can make a philosophical argument for whatever, but we're talking about a weed. Jesus, killer of weeds. Is that your best argument? I tell people, if I were a lawyer and I tried to produce that Jesus was a killer of humanity based on him pulling up a weed or cursing a weed, that would be pretty weak.
But when we see this idea of justice, just like you just said, pulling up a weed, well, that's restorative. That's making room for other things to grow.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
All of a sudden,
say that again. Say that again. What you just said about making room again.
Making room for other fruitful things to grow, true fruits of the Spirit to grow, right? And so when we see these things from a new angle, justice all of a sudden turns. It gets a 180 from this human scapegoating mechanism of tribal culture and eye for an eye, retaliatory, retributive, vindictive, and vengeance-based, reconciliation. It's not reconciliation. Reconciliation is when both parties, the victim is healed and the victimizer is healed just as deeply, because at some level prior to their victimizing, they were likely, they guaranteed they were a victim, and they experienced deep brokenness that led them to that place. Hurting people hurt people. That's how humanity is have, if you look all the way back to Cain, how many times do I have to forgive? It was Peter that asked that, right? Yeah, Peter asked Jesus, how many times? 7 times, right? I did it 7 times, Jesus. See, the culture told him 3 times. So he's like, Jesus, 7 times. I'm going to do one more than doubling what culture has added with my Jewish heritage. It said, if I 3 times, and then I can write you off. 7 times. And Jesus is like, no, 7 times 70. Jesus is doing the same thing as the fig tree. He's going back to Cain and Abel.
And
right? And restoring that story where Abel's son, is it Lamech, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. He's restoring the story where if you hurt me, vengeance 7 times 70 upon your house.
That's what people don't know, is that when Jesus was saying that, that's what Lamech said in the Old Testament. I'm going to avenge myself 7 times 70 on you.
And he's wiping the slate clean. He's saying, no, it's mercy 7 times 7, not vengeance.
Yes,
Absolutely. That's God's justice, because that Jesus is the exact representation of my Abba and my Spirit.
So there's
it shows you the difference between grace and law.
Yep.
Lamech is there under the law. Everything in the Old Testament, like Bill was saying, is duty. It's it's a law. We'll make it a law, and all it does is produce wrath. The wrath of the law, Romans calls it.
Yep.
All right. When there's the New Testament, it's grace. There is no wrath. It's a wrathless.
It's a
wrathless God we serve.
It's the wrath of orge, again, which we've talked about that word. It's
right. The word wrath has to be defined.
We put that
better.
word back on that, but it's a totally different. It's passion. It's desire. It's unfailing, relentless restoration. I'm going to pull you out of the muck, and I'm going to clean you off, and we're going to go have a barbecue. Right? It's the prodigal son story. Wrath. That's passionate wrath, not.
It's heroic. It's heroic and rescuing wrath. I'm here to save you, child.
Well, if your car is about to get hit by a kid's about to get hit by a car, the wrath of a parent is coming out. Okay. Absolutely. Does it mean they're angry at the kid? No, they're in full protection mode, and they're going to do whatever they can. So the wrath, the deep, intense emotion, that's what the word wrath, orge, means. Any deep, intense emotion. It can be anger, which is where everybody defaults to. But what about the love being wrath?
Yeah.
The love of God is wrath, a deep, intense emotion pouring on us for our benefit, protection, purging, and cleaning.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen. So much of the word in the New Testament is that way. Absolutely.
Yep. Let me show you this really goofy picture. Hang on. It says, why did God have to send himself down to earth to become his own son, to sacrifice himself to himself, just to convince himself to forgive us? It's so backwards. And if we actually take a look at the dogma and the pattern of theology, those cubby boxes of law, really, it's legalism that has caused us to see incorrectly. Our lenses need cleaning or replacing. And that journey is difficult. That's what all these talks are about is I don't like to use the word deconstruction all the time, but people do identify with that word. I call it maturing as a disciple of Jesus. That's all this is.
Well,
so
To go back to our last week's study, not to hijack here and interrupt you, Mike, but I think there is an opportunity for us to kind of resolve what I started there with these words of Jesus that we talk, that from one angle, from a legalistic, kind of biblical literalist angle, can seem like Jesus was kind of a harsh dude saying some really tough things. If you read them, when I've intentionally gone back and read the working of Jesus when I think it's Matthew 23, where he's talking to the Pharisees and he's like, you hypocrites, you snakes, you scumbags.
Yeah, we like that part.
Coming, right? He's just, you can go back and read that entire passage, take out the anger, reimagine the entire situation, close your eyes and look at a man crying, begging them to not from a position of punching them with these words, but saying, you guys, you're acting like snakes, you're acting like hypocrites, begging them, consoling them, trying to pull them out from this legalistic framework. Read it from just a different emotional standpoint, and all of a sudden it's like the entire passage changes. We've just been programmed to read it through a lens of anger, not through a lens of compassion. And it changes when you can do that, because I think there's an element of that is absolutely fundamentally true when we see it through the lens of the cross.
I'm watching.
Yeah, there was that movie a few years back with the Happy Jesus. I don't know if y'all remember that or not. It's sort of he's a real small Jewish man, and he that played Jesus, but he was always laughing and smiling throughout a lot of it. And you know the scene where he says to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." In that particular scene, Jesus goes up and he hugs him and he starts weeping for Peter, and he's hugging Peter and he says, "Satan, get behind me." So he's actually getting Satan away from Peter. You know,
that makes sense.
There's so much, just a little sanctified imagination can come in and clean these things up, understanding that that the Semitic people's language is it uses rhetoric. There's a lot of strong rhetoric. They use something called block logic. And block logic is, it's a Hebraic way of thinking where it just says you're trying to make an emphatic point in just like 2 or 3 lines, and then you move on to something else. And you may be saying the exact opposite in the next one. That's why it's block logic. It's not connected to each other. So the point is that they're emphatic with their rhetoric. And Jesus was obviously that way, but they recognized it as rhetoric, and one thing, one other quick thing about the Pharisees, I really believe, I don't ever see Jesus calling out any individual person. He never called out any individual Pharisee. He was always speaking to groupthink. To the extent he was ever rebuking something, he was saying this groupthink, this hive mind that you're all operating out of, y'all are being graves, open sepulchers, That's what he was addressing. He wasn't addressing any particular individual, because I believe that he just treasured every individual. And I mean, he called Herod a fox at one point, but hey, if that's as bad as he got,
I actually used that same line. I said, if the worst you got is he called him somebody a fuzzy woodland creature, then you're right.
That's cute when it's really small.
A conniving, fuzzy woodland creature. That's where Jesus went. Exactly.
So what you guys are really doing is sharing a re-imaging of who the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is. This is what everything seems to be boiling down to. And this Sunday, this will be when this airs. Trinity Sunday will be over. But looking at the date today, this Sunday is Trinity Sunday, and I wouldn't have known that had I not been connected to some more traditional churches. Now my office is in a Lutheran church, and now I'm seeing some stuff my tribe just didn't give a hoot about. Right? We've lost a lot, and to see there is grace and light in a lot of the traditions. It's when it gets hijacked with legalism, suddenly becomes tainted. But then let's let's revisit these things, the things that have value, and let's explore them. Like I like this fig tree story. That was phenomenal. Love the bridge.
And I think the way we use our imagination is determined by our core motive. If our core is fear, then our imagination is going to be terrorized.
Absolutely.
And we're going to shut it down, and it's going to be simplistic and lack nuance, because fear always lacks nuance. Whereas if your primary motive is love or even passion, because I think compassion, it's all in there. But if those are your motives, then you're going to apply your imagination to the heroic qualities of God. And that's really the book that I wrote that's on the website is God versus Evil, God versus Evil, sculpting a heroic theology of God's heroic goodness. No, I'm sorry, God versus Evil, sculpting an epic theology of God's heroic goodness. Mm-hmm. And that's what it's all. If we use our imagination, how God can save and wants to save and empathizes with everything that's going on both sides of the aisle, and God is there. And I had a dear Facebook friend who died today, Ruth Tomlin. Yep. And I posted a tribute to her, some things that she had written. But I was and she had written me something years ago that really encouraged me. And I shared it on my post today. But in that, she said, Richard, the Lord has talked to me about you. And when she said that, and I reread it today and it whacked me out again. It was the most motherly thing anyone has ever done to me on Facebook. And the Lord was talking to me about you, and then she just blessed me left and right with it. And it's just, this woman used her imagination to honor God, to remove burdens, to make you feel better about living, to make you want to live. And she passed away last night in her sleep, peacefully, her kids said. So, I mean, sometimes I think the battle really is for our imaginations, and hell is so important. Because of all the battles we fight, that's the one that mucks with our imagination the most and tries to lure us into fear. And if we can defeat hell with our imagination, with our sanctified imagination, if we can defeat hell, then there's nothing we can't defeat.
Right.
Well, either he won or he didn't. Either he conquered what he said he came to conquer, or he didn't. We're not serving, loving, responding to an incomplete God or a weak God, or he left some out. No, he didn't do that. So this, again, when we come back to this hell topic, people still point to Jesus' words in Matthew 25. I think it's Matthew 25. Is that right? I think
there's 23, 25. Yeah.
Where he talks about, go to the hills, look out, danger's coming, there'll be gnashing of teeth. And again, the paradigm from which you read it, if you already begin with anger, ticked off God.
Well, I think you're nailing a point right there. That's probably a great point to close on. If we start with the idea that God looks like the Old Testament God and we're reading it forward, it's absolutely reasonable to see it through that lens, right? But that's not what we're asked to do. We've been given the fullest unveiling of God in the flesh, incarnation. That's how John 1 starts, right? We have to start at the end. We have to start at the resurrection, at the ascension, right? And then we have to work our way back to the cross and then to the transfiguration. And this is what God looks like. We work backwards to understand what God looks like. And then we read these things from that filter first. And that's where the imagination takes over. But if we start with the law, Moses version of God, we're going to see all these parables and metaphors incorrectly. But if we start with the Christ-like image of God, and we work backwards, they blossom with a whole new perspective of life and light.
I like what Richard said earlier. There's a few words that say God is, and God is light, and he is, what was the word we used earlier? Love, and he's also life. Those I always had three. To me, it was a trinity. But if he is life, love, and light, and we don't see the scriptures or read them through those three lenses, we got a problem. We're sitting ducks.
There is no darkness in God. There is no fear in God. There is no death in God.
I found it interesting when I taught on light years back. I think you might have been here in Ontario, Bill, at that time. And when I was sharing from the Psalms, that to God, light and darkness are the same. They are no different. Like, to read it out loud blew my mind, because people were hearing it for the first time like that, because we're digging into what is light. And to know that even in God, there is no darkness. It's all the same to him. It's our perception of what is dark. And even in our mind, this is where we're dead. Like, I was told that when Adam sinned and Eve sinned, we died. And we're told our spirit died. Nowhere in scripture does it say that. Nowhere. We're all projecting an idea because something must have died. What was it? It must have been our spirit because our body's still alive. No, we died in our mind. I think Jesus even said, while living, they're dead. We've heard that phrase a couple times. It's in our mind that we're darkened, and that darkness just needs the light that is already there.
Amen. And just a point on Matthew 25 is that there's two things, and we don't have time to go into what both the options are. But I will just say this: that everlasting punishment there, if you look at other translations, it can be, age abiding correction. One is it, because it has that Colossus word that I talked about, and most of the English translations, and aeonios does not always mean forever. Quite frequently, it means less than forever. Josephus used the word to speak to temples that had been torn down. They weren't forever, before he even talked about them. So the point is that word is that phrase can easily be interpreted age abiding correction. And then the other aspect of it is, I don't even think it's talking about human beings, but that could be something for another day on the thing. But basically the sheeps and the goats thing is
I want to come back to that.
Okay.
Maybe that's next week.
Yep.
Sheep and goats. There's so many new ways of looking at that are exciting and beautiful.
Yeah. Amen.
The one argument, well, I'd like to close with, and just a teaser maybe, is this: the argument I'm getting from people is we can't mess around with those translations, because apparently not until heaven and earth pass away does all this stuff happen. Okay. So there's people are attaching it to eternity somehow, or the end of the world. But when I discovered, hopefully we're thinking the same thing. But when I discovered that the temple was called heaven and earth, the top was called heaven and the bottom was called earth. That's where heaven and earth came. When that was destroyed in 70 AD and not a single stone was left on top of it because it was all covered in gold and they wanted to extract the gold off every brick, like, to see much of the fear that's been mongered from the words of Jesus in that text in Matthew, I see it already fulfilled. Yes, you can pull allegories out of it, but still the factual prediction of the one generation, because the trick word was this generation won't pass away. So I think we've been living on a horrible fear.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to remember too. You were asking earlier about where the misconceptions are. One other misconception is there's a timeline of different things being described in the New Testament. And a lot of people, because there might be an age where there's some suffering and anguish and cathartic producing thing, they paint that as the end of it. It's important to have a greater sense of how the thing ends. And there are so many passages that talk about at the end of all the ages, all will be all, and all will be worshiping, and Jesus will be all in all, and everything under the sea, above the sea, in the ground, above the ground, in the grave, above the grave, that it all will be worshiping God. Now, where's hell? There's no hell in any of that. And I just posted the other day, if you read Revelations closely, it says actually hell is empty. We're talking about something.
Well, hell is actually thrown
in that last chapter. It says hell shall give up her dead, and then be cast into the lake of fire forever. And there shall be no more death, and there shall be no more hell.
Yeah, hell's put into hell.
And the only thing that goes in the lake of fire with them are false identities, the things that the branches that weren't bearing fruit, not us. We don't go in there, Yeah,
sure. We get excited right at the end. Great. Well, maybe next time, as we can kind of catch up what we just talked about and actually look at some of the passages that are causing angst with people, and that maybe we can end the hell series on that, because I think some of those clobber verses we haven't really touched on, and that's okay, because we're dealing with the essence issue, right? Which people don't believe is most important. This is the most important part. Now we can revisit those verses and find a better hope-filled perspective.
Yes. Amen.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure chatting, and thank you everyone for watching. Join us next time as we continue this conversation. Wow. That was starting to pick up some steam at the end. It's like, sure, put the teasers all in the back end, and there's more coming. I'm looking forward to the next conversation. In fact, I just took some notes so that when we record our next two conversations, we're gonna dig deeper into the sheep and the goats, heaven and earth, and Matthew 23, end of the world or age. And some of those clobber verses, I like to address them. If you have a question about a verse related to hell, could you message me of one that the verses that might be giving you the hardest time? Because I want to make sure we cover some of the key clobber ones. We can't cover all of them, but because this isn't a series on hell, like a sermon series or a lecture. This is a conversation, which is so much more fun to have, and that leads us to deeper study. So I think this is so much fun. I love it. I just love it. So let's say hello to a few folks. We've got Sandra from the UK watching. So glad. And yeah, I'm glad to be back. I felt bad for not airing them. I had this one ready to go, and then the guys and I, we were going to record a couple more last week, and something happened. The conversation didn't allow us to. We got into some deep stuff, and it wasn't recordable. So yeah, I'm glad we're back on this. And we're going to cover a lot more topics as we go, and I'm going to interview other people as well. I love having Richard and Bill. I think somehow our chemistry works really well. It's fun. We banter off each other. It's great. And I hope you guys like it. I do. I don't get a lot of feedback. I just hear about some of the content is good, but I don't hear about the actual episodes. But that's okay. I think we still get enough people watching to make this worth it. Michael, good morning. I don't know where Mike, where do you live? I don't have a clue. Just quickly make a quick note. I'd like to figure out what country and whatever. Mike writes, how you see God is how you will act towards others. That is absolutely true. And that goes for all of life. Whatever you believe about God will affect how you view yourself, how you view everyone around you. If God doesn't exist, you act like it. If you think God's angry, you act like it. If you think God's complete pure love, you're going to act like it. And that goes for how we see ourselves. Oh, there we go. Sorry, Mike. Now I remember. Yep. See, it's been a couple weeks. I'm a bit foggy. In fact, at the beginning of the program, I forgot to move the screen over so that I could. I'm talking to a dead screen, thinking I'm live, and anyway, I'm a bit rusty this morning. It's so much fun. But yeah, what you said, Mike, about how we see others, how we act towards others, and that's why this topic of hell is so important. Because if you believe in hell as the place you're going to go to if you're going to rot and burn, number one, if it is that place, then every Christian needs to be the most loudest person ever, because they need to care about everyone else and to save them from hell. Like, that should be the passion, instead of all this nice, quiet country club churchianity. It's ridiculous. Sorry. Ooh, that's a different rant. Yeah. So anyway, so if you have this false concept of hell in your underpinnings and don't even know it, that's why we're unpacking this, to deconstruct those faulty concepts, or grow deeper in our discipleship and grow deeper in our understanding of who God is, for one. Sandra, you writes, God is love, life, and light, and spirit. Yes. When I was referring to the love, life, and light, I was referring to Jesus speaking to the I ams. And yes, God does say I am spirit. No gender in that, by the way, for all of those that have ears to hear. And Michael writes, David said, where can I get away from you? If I go to hell, you're there. Hebrews said, God is fire. God will is the fire. Sorry. Hebrews said, God is fire. God will burning are all wrong thing. Yeah, that's right. So God is a consuming fire, but that doesn't mean a punishing the hell out of you fire. I think the fire of God is love. I think it's so intense. We have no clue how intense that love is. It's very, very powerful. I love it. All right, that's it for today. You guys have a really fantastic day. Looking forward to next week, and I look forward to those who want to join me on Sunday morning. I'm live every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with Hope Fellowship. That's the small church I pastor, and you're all invited to join in or watch later, however it works. The family's growing. The Still Growing Grace family and the Hope Fellowship family. It's quite unique. We're joined at the hip, and it's a lot of fun. Yeah, Mike, you're right. The wrath is love. Any intense emotion is one of the definitions of wrath, not just anger. Anger is a word used to describe wrath, but it does not always mean that. It means any intense emotion. Comes from the word orge, which we get the word orgasm from, which is an intense emotion. So listen, there's more to this than we have been told. And if you caught that part that Bill's talking about there, the whole idea of thinking back, and the tree is referring to the Garden of Eden. Like, there's all these really cool parallels that we're just not told about. I love this. I'm hijacking that one, and I'm going to use it on a Sunday morning because not everybody listens to both episodes or both programs, so it's a lot of fun. All right, I'll see y'all next time, and it's been a pleasure being with you. It's great to be back, and don't forget to send me a private message about which verses you hope we can cover in the next 2 episodes. If we get to them, great. No promises, but it'd be great to at least to hear some feedback on that. Catch y'all later. See ya. Join me next time on Still Growing in Grace for more good news. Enjoy previous episodes by downloading our podcast at growingingrace.ca. You can also visit hopefellowshipycc.com to find our service times and location. If this show has been an encouragement to you, please consider making a donation today at growingingrace.ca and help us keep spreading this good news. Thank you again for tuning in to Still Growing in Grace.